right, thank you guys. Appreciate you all showing up. Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. Not done yet. First thing you're going to notice is I'm down here. What's that mean? It means y'all are going to be a part of this educational event, we'll say, right? So I do like these conversations to be interactive. Don't worry about the slides behind you. There are only 65 that we'll go through. I'm joking. Actually, don't tend to use many slides at all for security presentations, and I'll talk about that in a second. Probably the first thing you're wondering, if I had to guess, is why are we sitting here listening to Pure Storage talk to us about security? A lot of it is my background, personally. So I actually started my career doing offensive security ops with a 3-letter agency. And I got out of that. I went over to the defensive side of security. I was at Accenture for about 10 years, and I helped create and run a number of the practice areas in security over there before leaving to join one of my customers, Farmers Insurance, to be the CISO for the Farmers brands. So I ran security at Farmers for a couple years, drove a lot of success, and was asked by Zurich Insurance, which is the global parent of Farmers, to go repeat that mission in about 150 countries around the world, and took a team of a couple hundred folks. We went off and did that. Shortly thereafter, I got recruited by PricewaterhouseCoopers on the back end of a large data loss event that they had, and was asked to lead all of IT and security as the US and global CTO. So I ran a team of about 2,000 around the world, budget of about $2 billion. Did that till I couldn't travel anymore and landed here at Pure about 6.5 years ago. And stay really close to the cybersecurity space. I still do global quarterly threat report briefings with the FBI. Tend to present a lot with the FBI and DHS in various places. So I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the world in the cyberspace. So hopefully we can leverage some of that today. All right, with that said, what I usually talk about in this context is really how threat actors work and how you can ultimately protect yourself. So maybe starting off, talk a little bit about the types of threat actors. We'll talk a little bit about how different attacks can unfold, and then we'll go into how you protect yourself, maybe before, during, and after an attack. Does that sound good to everybody? All right, cool. All right, so let's see here. Skip all this. If you think about the world today, there are really two types of threat actors that exist in the world, okay? There are criminal threat actors, and criminal threat actors are folks who just want to monetize an attack, okay? These are the ones that you hear about most of the time. Ransomware attacks and the likes, right? They just want to get in, they want to get paid Bitcoin, and they want to move on, okay? The other type of attacker are APTs, or advanced persistent threats. Call them nation states or other things. These are folks who are highly persistent in an environment. They get in, they stay a long time, you'll never know they're there. They'll exfiltrate data. Usually they want to get a confidential IP of some sort. And the likelihood of you ever detecting them is slim and none. Now, that said, your chances of protecting against a criminal threat actor are okay, depending on what you're doing to protect yourselves, like putting the right controls in place. But to be honest, an APT you have very little chance against. So when we think about it, what I tend to focus on in these sessions is more the criminal threat actor. Because most of you are probably worried most about like ransomware, if I had to guess, right? Is that fair to assume? Ransomware attacks? Yeah, okay. So, I like to talk a little bit about ransomware, how the attacks unfold, so that we can put a level set in place and everybody can understand kind of the perspective, so that when we talk about defending against an attack, we'll know where we're coming from, okay? So with the criminal threat actors, the first thing that I'll tell you is they're not really that good. They're not that sophisticated. They're not that technically proficient in a lot of cases. A lot of times these are business people. They're more focused on figuring out who has deep pockets, who's likely to pay a ransom, how much are they willing to pay, who has an insurance policy, what's the value of that policy, that type of work. Once they've made a determination on who they're going to attack, they're going to go on the dark web. They'll go on the dark web, and the first thing they're going to do is rent a ransomware as a service platform. Anybody want to take a guess at how much it costs to rent ransomware as a service nowadays? Somebody. How much? $5,000 a month? You'd actually get them for about $200 a month, believe it or not. Cheap. And for that, you're going to get all the tools you need to lay an attack in an environment. You're going to get tools to elevate your privilege once you get in. You get, obviously, the ransomware payload. You get command and control services in the cloud to launch an attack. You get exfiltration tools. You get all the things that you need to launch your attack and make money. Now, you can also split your take with these platforms. Usually it's about a 40-60 split, 40 to the platform, 60 to the attacker. And for that, you also get all the negotiation services to support the attack. So when you launch your attack and people are getting the encrypted screen, right, the number that they call is actually going to the platform, and they provide local language support for the environment you're in. So you basically, as the attacker, you just sit back and wait to collect Bitcoin. That's it, okay? Now, after you make your stop on the dark web at the platform provider, you're going to make your stop at the second place. It's called an initial access broker, okay, the IAB. The initial access broker, these are groups that go out and collect credentials. So everybody here heard of phishing attacks? Anybody not heard of a phishing attack? I know you're not going to raise your hand because that's a negative corollary, right? So phishing attacks are done actually by these groups. They're not done by the attacker. They're done by these groups. So they go out and they harvest credentials in mass. And then they sell them for pennies on the dollar. So somebody that wants to get into InterSystems, they go out, they go on the dark web, you say, okay, I want credentials for InterSystems, you buy them, and then you're going to use those credentials. You're going to log in as a regular user. You'll use the rented tools that you just got on the dark web to elevate your privilege to get to admin level. Once you've done that, you can lay your payload and you can start moving around the environment pretty seamlessly. So you can figure out what data assets you might want to exfiltrate or other things, okay? Now, it's really important to understand a couple things. And I'm somewhat provocative, okay? So I'll make some pretty direct statements and love to be challenged if you guys want. But first thing is, there is nobody that can detect ransomware in your environment before it starts encrypting data, okay? Anybody that comes and tells you otherwise, tries to sell you a product, they're lying to you. Why? Why is because ransomware as a payload runs in memory on a host. Okay, so it's running as a known process name on a host, usually even with a known process ID in a lot of cases. All ransomware variants nowadays are polymorphic, so they constantly change from a code perspective. So there isn't really a known signature base you can use to detect them. Plus, once they're loaded in memory, they have no signature on disk, so you don't see them, okay? As the ransomware is running in memory on those devices, it's watching for users to interact with the unstructured data, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel, that kind of thing. When a user goes to save a file, it does two things when it picks up on that. First is it makes a copy of the file. It takes a copy of the file and it corrupts it or encrypts it, some would say. But what it actually does is it skips the first 512 bytes of the file, which is a file header. It'll encrypt up to the next meg, and it leaves anything past that alone. So by leaving the header intact, it makes it impossible to detect, right? All the anti-malware on the device just sees it as a regular file. It takes that corrupted version and it stuffs it into a hidden directory or a volume shadow store on that host. Second operation, takes a good copy of the file and puts it where the user expected. So to an end user, it's just a normal day at work. Nothing's wrong, right? So just pre-encrypting all this data in the back. Now, when the bad guy decides or gal decides it's time to try to get paid, they go to their command and control services in the cloud. They'll call into the environment and say, encrypt. All the files from the good directory get deleted. Files from the bad directory get moved in their place. It looks like there's this really high-speed encryption campaign going on. But in reality, a lot of it was already done in the background, okay? So anybody coming to saying, hey, we can detect ransomware, no, not possible. The only way you could detect that ransomware payload running is to take in-memory snapshots of every process running on every running host in your environment and quickly compare those to known bad signatures before the malware morphs. And there is no enterprise in this room or in this world that has that type of capability today. Okay? Does that make sense so far? All right, we're all on the same page then. Any questions on that? Yeah, hang on. I'm going to bring in the mic. They're recording, so. Yeah.
So I run OS X for most of my stuff, and I have an encryption blocker that watches for encryption and asks me to allow or trust or deny it. Is that going to actually catch what's in memory?
So An OS X exploit actually works differently. The way that encryption works with a Linux kernel is different. And in fact, I tell a lot of folks, if you can get to a point of running Linux in your environment, a lot of these attack groups are going to turn and go the other way. Why? Because a lot of them, again, aren't that sophisticated. You drop them into a command prompt, so into a bash shell or something, they don't know what the hell to do. They look at it and they're like, what is this? Right? They don't want that. They want to run an executable, a Windows executable in most cases, right? Why? Because that's what most enterprises still run, right? So you're seeing more and more ESX types of exploits, and there are certainly variations that occur, but I would say the broad sweeping mass of attackers are still looking at Windows hosts, and they're still trying to monetize the piece because it's still very successful. Now, does that make sense? Fair? Yeah. All right. So again, where you can raise the bar against an attacker, that's what our number one goal actually is, okay? Now, any questions, I guess, on this part? Yeah.
Is that true only for a headless environment, or does it apply to, GNOME or something like that too?
So the term, no, it's not just the terminal. It's any operating environment that basically won't run a Windows executable, right? Most of the tools are still written with Windows binaries, so they just don't know how to run terminal commands. Yeah. Even if you had, if you go out and find some of the tools that are more advanced that use scripting, like shell scripting, that can even be a challenge. So a lot of these folks are just really focused on running a standard execution playbook. Great questions, thanks. Questions? Yeah. All right. I should have stayed back here.
So related to an InterSystems cache database, even if it's running on Windows, that database file stays open by the cache executable all the time. So we wouldn't be looking at that getting encrypted then either. Does that sound reasonable?
That's probably true. Yeah, you're probably going to go after the Windows host itself. But now, what I'll say is there's a caveat. So I was going to save this more toward the end, but I'll tell you now. A lot of what we're seeing in terms of ransomware, though, is evolving. So if you go to certain parts of the world, say Ukraine, a lot of what you see in Iran and Israel, Africa, is now a variant called wiperware, okay? Wiperware is exactly what it sounds like. It is some really nasty stuff. Wiperware, in essence, destroys the files on a device, or worse. So it actually, a lot of wiperware actually functions at the firmware level. So it'll actually go just destroy a host entirely, meaning you have to now buy new equipment. So, wiperware is kind of where a lot of this is evolving toward. And what will happen is these attackers will come, they'll set up around your environment. These are like little bombs, okay? And then they're going to call you up and say, hey, we planted these bombs, this wiperware around your environment. Pay us or we're going to destroy you. And it won't be a matter of just buying a decryption key. It won't be a matter of just restoring from backup. You will now be buying new hardware in a lot of cases. So it's really, really nasty stuff. And in fact, I noticed last week one of the ransomware groups actually put a wiper command in one of the ransomware variants that's on that you can rent on the dark web now. So I think it's just a matter of time before they start to really expand down that path. And anybody that's really interested in it could go look up. I think it was last summer. There was a Russian group that it was an accident in my mind. I'm pretty certain it was an accident. But they were doing some sort of testing at an ISP in Kentucky, and they burn out the firmware on about 500,000 ActionTel modems. So to the point that the ISP had to actually mail out new modems to their customers. So I don't think that was an intentional ploy. I think somebody made a mistake, but that's the type of thing that you're going to start to find. So it gets really, really bad down the path on some of this stuff, okay? So let's think about, kind of what we can do to protect ourselves. The two key points that if you go look at any federal guidance today, go talk to the FBI, the NSA, CISA, the White House, internationally, if you go to GCHQ or Signals Corp in Australia, they're going to tell you the same two things. The first is visibility. Visibility in this context means security analytics, and I'll come back to it in a minute. The second is resiliency. And resiliency means tiers or layers of recoverability. Now, in essence, what they're telling you is if you don't have a good visibility program, and I'll again explain what that means, then you better be able to recover quickly because there is no in between, okay? Once I'm in your environment as an attacker and I elevate my privilege to admin level, your chances of catching me are slim and none. I am very hard to get. You have to get lucky to get in front of me, basically. I have a lot of rain to move around the environment. So in security, that time frame from logging in as a regular user with those credentials that we bought, and I elevate my privilege to admin, we call that breakout time. Okay, we used to measure that in hours. Anybody know what it's down to now? Average breakout time? About 30 minutes. So what that means is you've got about a 30-minute window to detect an adversary coming in, doing something anomalous to elevate their privilege, getting admin in your environment, and then they're off to the races, and you're owned. All right, so let's think about this. What can we actually do to protect ourselves before an attack? So really tend to focus on a few key areas. Number one is hygiene. By far, the number one thing that you can do to protect yourselves, bar none, is good hygiene. Good hygiene, in my mind, means being able to patch a critical vulnerability in a day, highs within a couple days, mediums within a week, and lows within a month. As a CISO, if you're not at that level, that's where you need to be investing time and money. Number two is authentication. And we think about authentication as one-time passwords, right? Everybody here is like, oh, OTP, right? So I get a one-time code to my phone or whatever. Great, you got to do that. Definitely set that up. It's a good thing. But it's not going to save you. Why? Just like I can go on the dark web and I can rent a ransomware platform, I can also go on the dark web and I can rent a cellular microsite. Anybody know what it costs to rent a cellular microsite a month? Any guesses? About 15 to 20 grand. Once I've done that, I'm now on a cellular backbone just like any other provider. I look like T-Mobile or AT&T. That means I can now directly or indirectly capture traffic coming across those networks. I can use a targeted attack. I get all the text messages, and I can get phone calls too. So I can sit in the background and intercept before you ever see them. So those one-time codes aren't going to save you. What you want to focus on instead is what's called credential vaulting, okay? This is something like a Beyond Trust or a CyberArk where you take all important word, of your admin credentials, and you put them in the vault. You keep them there centralized so that if an admin needs to use them, they check them out for a period of time. When they're done, they get checked back in, credentials get changed, nobody ever knows what they look like. Really important. Why are these two things important, these first two things? Because it raises the bar against the attacker. Again, where you make it so their out-of-the-box tooling doesn't work like they expect, they're not going to spend a lot of time to make it work. They're not going to recode something. They're not going to try to shove a square peg through a round hole. They're likely just to drop things and move on. Go hit the next easier target, right? Because they're criminals. They want to get paid. They want their Bitcoin. That's what they're after. Okay? Now, the third area that we cover here is around education. Education in this context isn't probably what you think. Everybody usually thinks about things like phish me campaigns, right? Phishing. Teaching users don't click these bad links, don't open these bad attachments. Now, I'll use some crass statements here. Like, having been a CISO before, what I always used to tell senior level folks is, you're never going to fix stupid. Okay? Now, crass, but what I mean by that is, no matter what you do, you're always going to have some subset of users in your environment who are going to do the wrong thing. No matter what. They're going to click the wrong thing. They're going to open the wrong thing. And they don't do it maliciously. They're not bad people. It's just going to happen. So instead, what I tend to focus on, tabletops. Tabletops are where you bring all your executive team into a big room like this. Sit them around a bunch of round tables, and we role play an event. Hey, we were just hit by a ransomware attack. What are we going to do? Who's on point to coordinate the response? Who's going to call the CEO at 4 in the morning on a Sunday to let them know that we were hit? Because guess what you're not doing? Sending them an email, right? Who's going to be on point to talk to the local news media when they show up at our door? Who's going to keep Joe and Sally in IT from tweeting about the response? Which application's the first one you're going to recover in your environment? By the way, that's always a fun one, right? So having lived through some of these events, it's like Game of Thrones. And you want to see IT people get animated, like tell them that their application's not number one. It's a lot of fun. So figuring that piece out is critical, right? But these are really important tasks. So focus on tabletops. Now, yep.
Quick question, Andy. You mentioned here Beyond Trust and CyberArk. Are you speaking of personal credentials like storing in LastPass and 1Password, or is this more of a business level, like?
Yeah, so this is the enterprise grade LastPass or 1Password. So you can put all your service accounts in there, you put all your regular user credentials, your interactive user credentials in there. So, but anything that has admin in your environment should be stuffed into that vault. Yeah. All right. The last area that we tend to talk about here is visibility. Now, visibility, again, in this context means security analytics. So Splunk, Elastic, Logarithm, QRadar, those are some of the more common ones, okay? These platforms do two things. The first is they ingest data. So they have a bunch of data collectors out collecting logs from various systems. They ingest that data into a big pool, and then they're correlating that data. And you need to correlate across 3 domains to be effective. The 3 domains are the network, the endpoint, and the end user. All 3, okay? You have to be able to correlate that data very quickly across those 3 domains. So you're looking for anomalies so that you can then orchestrate the output and feed your cyber threat hunt team so you can tell them exactly where to go take action before bad things occur. Again, going back to breakout time. What it means is you have, in essence, a 30-minute window to ingest that data, correlate that data across the 3 domains, network, endpoint, end user, tell your cyber threat hunters, and go stop that bad event from starting to escalate. Very narrow window of time, okay? So, very important thing to think through.
Thanks. What exactly do you mean when you say correlate across those 3 domains? What does that look like?
Good question. So correlation is basically saying, I've got a baseline, and I understand what normal looks like according to network, endpoint, and end user. So normal user flow, normally this application is connecting at these times and interacting with this data, generally these amounts. These are this user, Andy logs in from Dallas, Texas between the hours of 8 and 5. That's normality, right? Now all of a sudden it's outside of that window. Maybe it's 2 in the morning and Andy's logging in from Uzbekistan, and all of a sudden, this application is starting to transfer a bunch of data. That's not right. So we want to correlate those events, but you got to put all those pieces together to understand that something's wrong. Just looking at Andy logging in from a different place might not be enough. Or just looking at the time of day might not be enough. Just looking at the data flows might not be enough. So you have to understand in context of network, endpoint, and end user combined what a normal flow looks like so that you can identify abnormal in that context. Help? Okay. So again, really important that you got this narrow window of time to do all that work, which is really hard. Now, one of my only plugs for Pure, right? This is an area that Pure can help you. We can make that process really, really fast. And where you hear developers talking about slow Splunk queries or security queries or things taking too long to run, come talk to Pure. We can help you. And that's as far as I'm going to go on that, but I'm happy to go in more depth outside of this, okay? Now, any questions on the visibility piece or awareness training? No? Okay. So let's talk about during an attack. During an attack, your real focus is containment of the event, okay? So you want to contain the affected hosts. Now, what's that mean? It means using virtual networking rules, generally speaking, to isolate those implicated devices. What you never want to do during an attack, if at all possible, is turn the power off to a device. Let them run. Isolate them, but let them run. The reason is because once you turn the power off, you've lost almost all, if not all, of the forensic capability on that device. So let it run. If you have to, go pull a network cable. But don't turn it off, okay? Keep it running. Now, another plug for Pure. With Pure, we have a capability called safe mode on our arrays that, again, we'd be happy to go into offline. Our team's over here too, by the way. But happy to talk to you about that. It basically gives you guaranteed recoverability on your arrays right there when a bad event occurs. So safe mode in security terms is a set of out-of-band, multi-factor authenticated snapshots. Wow, that's a mouthful. But what it brings is what's called indelibility. Now, this is very important to understand, okay? Who here has heard about immutability? Come on, guys. This is not a hard one. Okay, immutability. Everybody's heard of immutability, I'm guessing. So immutability means that once data is written, it can't be changed. Everybody's focused in the world today about immutable backups. I have immutable backups, or I have immutable storage. Guess what? It's total nonsense. It's useless. Why? Because when I get in, what's the first thing that I do when I get in? You guys remember? Somebody tell me. What's the first thing that I do when I get in? I elevate my privilege. I become admin, right? Once I'm admin, almost all storage systems and backup systems today are using what's called domain integrated authentication. So now what that likely means is I have admin credentials on those systems too. I will move over to those systems and I'll delete your immutable whatever, or I will otherwise corrupt your immutable whatever. You want to focus on indelibility. Indelibility means it cannot be deleted by anyone, even with admin credentials, okay? So with Pure, we give you indelibility on the storage side. So nobody, even with admin credentials, can delete your data. Indelibility, way up here. For those listening on the phone, my hand's way high. Immutability, way down here, right? So focus on that indelibility piece. Becomes very important. Any questions on that so far?
There's a recent outbreak of I don't know if it's being exploited yet, but AWS, where the threat actors will come in and compromise your entire encryption chain, and as with respect to AWS and all of its storage, thus rendering all of your backups unreachable. Does your system counteract that or circumvent that?
Absolutely it does. And it does for a couple of reasons. One, we use a different encryption. So we're using AES 256-bit, so not encryption technology necessarily, but a different methodology to encrypt when we're within AWS. So we're not dependent on their encryption alone. But with safe mode, we're also putting those snapshots into a protected partition that is also encrypted, but it's inaccessible by anyone, even with admin credentials on an array. The only way that you can access it with Pure, if you need to fully delete data, with safe mode enabled, is you have to go through an out-of-band support process where we validate with two people, so like a two-man key, via unique pins that they're employees. We validate with our account team that they're employees in good standing with the company. They can then open a remote session from the customer side, and support can remote in and help delete data that needs to be deleted. So it's a serious process that you have to go through. But the benefit is now, originally this was built for insider threats. So we were looking at it saying, hey, some storage admin has a bad day. They could go in and delete your primary data, delete your snapshots, your backups, whatever, and it's going to be hard to recover. Well, now that can't happen. But we also lucked out into the fact that it also works really well for something like a ransomware attack, because now these attackers also can't get in and delete your data or otherwise corrupt your data, okay? So it gives you a guaranteed point for recovery right there on the array when something bad happens. Now, why is that important? Because after an attack, There's only one thing that matters, okay? And that is speed. There is no executive in the world that cares what your storage is. They don't care what your backup is in this scenario. They care about one thing. Are we back up and running yet? If not, why not, and when will we be? And that's a phone call you get about every 5 minutes until everything works. And it's awful. So your hair is on fire and you're like, oh my God, quit calling, please. We got to get work done. So in this context, what do we need to focus on? Resiliency. We want tiers or layers of recoverability. Again, why? Because I told you, as an attacker, I can now go after your backup system, right? I'll go after your even immutable backups, right? What I can do there is I can go to your backup environment as an admin, and I can modify a backup job. So I could take little bits and pieces out. You might not even notice until the very end, right? I could go ransom the catalogs or indexes for your backups, which will invalidate all your backup files. What I'm not likely to do is just go delete all the backup files. That's really, really noisy, and it's an expensive IT operation. It takes a lot of time. So I probably won't do that, but I'll find other ways, right? Same thing with the storage, right? I can go after your storage. So what do we want to focus on instead? Instead, we want layers or tiers of recovery, starting with our primary storage tier. Regardless of the storage you're using, hopefully it's pure, but if it's not, regardless of the provider, you want to use snapshots in that storage tier. Your snapshots should be there as your primary means of recovery when a bad event occurs, okay? Now, when we have an attack, this is really important. When you have an attack, you always start your recovery at the point closest to the attack possible. So what that means is if you had a snapshot that was a second before you noticed that attack, you start there. If it was a minute, an hour, a day, you're going to take that snapshot. You're going to then reconstitute it into a sandbox environment. Let your incident response team come in. They're going to clean known indicators of compromise or bad things, right? To security folks, forensics folks, these are going to be very obvious things, like glaring red lights, be like rootkits and running malware. We're not seeking perfection, okay? We're seeking good enough. Get the business back online fast. Fast meaning minutes or hour, maybe a couple hours, but not hours or days. Okay, from there, you want to have a middle tier of storage that's lower cost, hopefully, where you can transition snapshots to that tier. So tier 2 is lower cost tiered storage for snapshots. Now, when you get attacked, once the initial review's done and you're back up and running again, you move your forensic people over to that tier to review those snapshots and go deeper levels of dive, okay? So if it's going to take them an additional month to run their tools, so be it. Let them spend the month running in that middle tier. As they find additional things to clean up, great. Make the changes back in production. But your business isn't down. You're running. You're moving, serving customers, right? As you find these additional things. Your third tier is your backup tier. You don't want to use backups to recover. No company in this room should be using backups to recover from a cyber event nowadays. Why? Because they're too slow and they're highly vulnerable to attack. So even if they don't get attacked, recovering from backup is going to be way slower than recovering off those snapshots in the first two tiers, okay? They'll get you way back up and running. Now, that said, if you want to use backups to recover a tier 4 app you can be without for a month, so be it. But your primary, your most critical applications, you should be focused on different forms of recovery. Not to mention, again, the backups are highly vulnerable to attack in this scenario, right? So when you guys hear about maybe companies telling you, oh, I can give you the perfect point in time recovery. I hear this from backup vendors a lot, right? Total nonsense. They can't do it. Why can they not do that? They can't do it because there are unknown vulnerabilities that exist in the world today, or they may be known by a few, right? But they're not highly exploited. So there's not necessarily a CV that exists for them. Y'all have heard of zero-day attacks, right? Anybody here? Everybody heard of a zero-day attack? Yeah? There's also something that I call an N-1 day attack, okay? N-1s are developed by nation states. These are things that exist that, Tailored Access and other groups, perhaps in the US government, might create that they're using for their attacks, right? They're things that nobody in the wild knows about until they decide they've developed something newer that's better, or something that they like better, or they just get tired of. Then they take that and they throw it over the wall to one of our friends. So in the US's case, maybe it's somebody like the UK or Australia or Israel. All of a sudden, it becomes a known thing out in the wild. Somebody identifies it, and then it's a 0 day. Okay, and then there's a known exploit available for it. There are CVEs created, and we can generally defend against it. But there are attacks that exist that nobody knows about up until that point. So these companies that are telling you they know the perfect point in time to recover to, total nonsense, because they don't know that. A good example of this is last month, there was a new vulnerability, Linux vulnerability, that was identified and released. CVE was created for it. It had been in the wild for 3 years. 3 years, okay? So that vulnerability existed for 3 years. Now, whether or not it was being exploited, who knows, right? But what's that mean for a perfect point in time recovery? Does it invalidate them? Do you recreate them? Are they still valid? I don't know. I wouldn't want to be using them. So these companies that are coming out with some of these things are, I would say stretching the truth in some cases, right? So make sure that you're doing a deep dive investigation. You really understand what it is you're in for when it comes to this resiliency process. It's really important that you have tiers or layers of protection for data recovery. That's the net takeaway here. You can't be dependent just on backups alone today. It's not good enough. You will be out of business at some point, okay? All right, that's a lot of my spiel. What kind of questions do you guys have? What do we want to talk about?
So I'm just kind of curious about this. If we were to get hit, or somebody gets hit with the ransomware attack, and then you decide to pay the ransomware, how does the recovery work from that? Does the ransom guy give you the actual key, and then you have to run all kinds of manual decryption? That's pretty much it.
Yeah, so the good attack groups will give you the key. They'll give you a decryptor. Problem is that a lot of these folks, when they write the tooling, they don't often test to the extent that you might expect. Yeah. So, yeah. It may or may not work is the net. And if it does, what you might find is they write it in such a way that it's not very efficient. So a good example, the Colonial Pipeline attack. Like most people here have heard of the Colonial Pipeline attack, big attack, right? They bought the decryptor, okay? So they paid for it. They paid the ransom, tens of millions of dollars. Get the decryptor, and guess what? It's written as a single-threaded process. Now, Colonial Pipeline has hundreds of billions of files. I mean, doing the math on that, a single-threaded decryptor means that it's going to decrypt one file at a time, right? It's going to take a long time. So what did these guys end up doing? They ended up getting in a car or bus or something big, driving to Iron Mountain to get backup tapes. They had to go rent the actual readers, the equipment, because they didn't have them anymore. And then started recovery from tape while they were continuing to decrypt it along the way as well. So your mileage may vary. That's why it's really important to think about it in terms of snapshots, having that fast recovery, where you can get it back really quickly.
If they're purchasing something on the dark web and they need an application, are they trying to access your network? I mean, I assume at some point they're going to have to, or are they trying to get, is it basically just phishing where you're installing it and then they access it via they're going to have to get network access to use it,
Yeah, so the first thing they do, or the second thing they do, is they go buy credentials into your environment, okay? So when I go to what's called an initial access broker, I'll buy a set of credentials for the company that I'm gonna go try to breach, okay? So usually you're gonna buy 100 or maybe more, right? And a bunch of them probably don't work. Others, you might get lucky, right? So once I'm in, I can then use tooling that I've rented from that RAS provider to elevate my privilege. So I get I get access into your environment, usually via an endpoint, so a user endpoint. I'll elevate my privilege, so I'll use some exploit to then, break out into some shell that gives me admin credentials. I can start installing my various payloads and start to move around the environment. I may move over to AD and create myself a backdoor credential. A lot of different things you could do in essence, but you'll retain access and you'll start to move around the environment. It doesn't come in as a network breach. It comes in on the user side or via application. Yeah.
Would it be at all helpful to kind of act like undercover cop and try and see, hey, can we buy what the attackers are trying to buy and see if it's out there? And then I don't know if that does any good, even if you know it's out there.
Yeah, it's always a game, right? They're always refreshing and getting more. So it's great to work with a partner who can do that. Find a good, red team partner that'll go on the dark web and look for vulnerabilities. I'll be honest, I stay close to an Israeli group, and I talk to those guys a lot about looking for Pure, frankly. So are there known exploits that are available? Because just like the backup providers. The funny thing is, a lot of these backup companies will say, "Oh, I'll give you a $10 million guarantee that against data loss or whatever." Well, the thing I always ask about that is, one, how many times have you ever paid out on it? Okay, because they're not getting exploited. You can go in the news and read about a bunch of ransomware attacks, right? That's happening. But two, what they don't tell you is you can go on the dark web and you can buy exploit kits for all of them. You can buy them for Rubrik, Cohesity, Commvault, Veeam. You take your pick. You can buy them for all of them. And so, from my perspective, I'm looking at it from Pure too. So occasionally I'll ask, hey, you seen anything new? Any exploit packs available for Pure? Fortunately, knock on wood, that hasn't happened. But it could happen to anybody, right? Any software is potentially exploitable. Just a matter of who wants to take the time to do it. So, where you can partner with a good red team or where you have access to that people with that knowledge, absolutely a good thing to leverage. Other questions? No. How much time do we have? I got time for one more question, at least, maybe two, maybe. No? You all are like, there's a break. We're done with questions. All right, look, I'm around. If y'all want to ask any questions, I'm happy to stick around or find me at the Pure booth. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today.